Fox News Sunday.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
So let's start with the president's appointment of Matthew Whitaker as acting attorney general. Here's what he said about Whitaker on Friday and what he said about him last month.
I don't know Matt Whitaker. Matt Whitaker worked for Jeff Sessions.
I can tell you Matt Whitaker is a great guy. I mean, I know Matt Whitaker.
So, does the president know Matt Whitaker or not? And specifically, did he know before appointing him that Whitaker was a critic of the special counsel's investigation?
The president does know Matt Whitaker, has gotten to know him over the course of the last year since he has been the chief of staff to the attorney general. The president's point is it's not like he's putting a friend in there who he's known for his entire life. He's putting somebody who has been working at the Department of Justice for 13 months now in a very senior position as chief of staff to Attorney General Sessions. And the president has dealt with Matt Whitaker in many different situations in the White House. I've been in some of those meetings myself, so I've watched them interact. I've watched Mr. Whitaker brief the president and others in the room.
If I may, specifically, Kellyanne, did he know that he was such a sharp critic of the Mueller investigation?
I'm not aware of that because it's not even clear to me that Mr. Whitaker has been briefed on the Mueller investigation. He has been the chief of staff to a recused attorney general. It's the deputy attorney general, his chief, and his team that has been overseeing the Mueller investigation. So it's not even clear to any of us that Mr. Whitaker has been read into most of the Mueller investigation. If you're talking about Matt Whitaker's statements as a private citizen a year and a half ago when the Mueller investigation first started, what he has said on cable TV, I don't think that disqualifies somebody from being the chief law enforcement officer at the Department of Justice, which is an executive function.
Since you reference it, let's talk about it, because Whitaker has had a lot to say about Mueller. Here he is about a possible way to shut down the special counsel.
I can see a scenario where Jeff Sessions is replaced with a recess appointment, and that attorney general doesn't fire Bob Mueller, but he just reduces the budget so low that his investigation grinds to almost a halt.
And here's Whitaker on Mueller looking into President Trump's finances.
I think that is a red line that's beyond the scope of the letter that the Deputy Attorney General issued and appointed Director Mueller as special counsel.
And here is Whitaker on the centerpiece of the entire investigation.
The truth is there was no collusion with the Russians in the Trump campaign.
Given what seems to be, you say he hasn't been briefed since he came in, but at least his predisposition on the investigation, how can he fairly oversee it now? And specifically, if Whitaker were to decide to block a Mueller subpoena of the president, or were to decide that he would not send a full special counsel report to Congress, would the president back him on that?
We are so far past the period in which those comments were made by Matt Whitaker as a private citizen, Chris, and here's why. Since then, and through the course of this Mueller investigation, which has gone on for over a year and a half, about a year and a half, and has cost taxpayers millions of dollars, over 1.1 or 1.4 million pieces of paper have been produced in compliance with the Mueller investigation request. 33 Trump-associated witnesses and counting, and even people he doesn't know, he said I've never met, have been called before Mr. Mueller, as I understand it. So we've been nothing but compliant. It is the president himself who said it would be a red line to go into his finances, because the president listened to everybody at the beginning, which is this is about Russia collusion. This is about
I know, Kellyanne, but it's different from what the president. But forgive me, it's different from what the president says than what Whitaker says when he is now overseeing the investigation. So the question is, given his predisposition against it, can he fairly oversee it? And if he decides to some way limit or block the Mueller investigation now, because he can as the acting attorney general, will the president back him?
The president is not looking. The president said he has not discussed the Mueller investigation with Whitaker. He's made that very clear the other day. I believe somebody asked him that question. I've never been witness to them discussing it, and I'll go a little bit farther. It would be a mistake to try to shut down the Mueller investigation in the way that you describe it, because we've been so compliant. And everything that was promised, Russia collusion, there were people out there sit tight. There were Democrats out there, sit tight, everyone, because he's not going to be in office very long. We'll find the electors, we'll recount in Michigan and Wisconsin, then we'll impeach him, or he won't like it in D.C. Guys, get used to it. And if there's proof of collusion, we're waiting to look at the final report. And I would just note to you that the gentleman who's been overseeing the Mueller investigation, the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, has called Matt Whitaker a, quote, superb choice to be acting Attorney General. I think that's important because people who are working with him feel confident that he can be the chief law enforcement officer at the Department of Justice. Chris, also just quickly, the Department of Justice does many important things to this country that don't involve Bob Mueller or this investigation. I understand. But I think people need to realize that.
No, I understand that, but I do want to, this is the specific area where people are interested, and there's a controversy about Whitaker. There's also a controversy about whether his appointment as acting Attorney General is even legitimate. And as you well know, your husband, George Conway, joined with a former Obama official to write this in the New York Times. It's unconstitutional, it's illegal, and it means anything Whitaker does or tries to do in that position is invalid. I know, Kellyanne, this is not your favorite subject, but here is what the president had to say about it on Friday.
You mean Mr. Kellyanne Conway?
He wrote that you were unconstitutionally appointing him. Is he wrong?
He's just trying to get publicity for himself. Why don't you do this? Why don't you ask Kellyanne that question?
So, following the president's direction, is your husband wrong about the constitutionality of it? Is he just trying to get publicity? And how do you feel about your husband so frequently, publicly criticizing your boss?
Well, it doesn't affect me or my job at all. I've never been doing better personally or professionally. People argue about the Constitution every day. That's why we have a United States Supreme Court. It's why we have an entire U.S. Circuit Court system. They are there to talk about conflicts within the Constitution and its interpretation. So he and his co-author have one opinion. The president and his attorneys have another. Respectfully, I offer my advice to the president in private. I don't need to put it on the opinion pages because I'm counselor to the president. And the president and his attorneys are convinced that there are at least 3 or 4 ways that this appointment does pass muster, is constitutional under the Constitution, first of all, through the Vacancies Act. Also, there's a statute passed in 1998, and there's a 2003 Department of Justice opinion about this. But I think the Mr. Kellyanne Conway comment is instructive too, because people describe my husband as Kellyanne Conway's husband more often than they describe him by his first name. So I'm sure the feminists are really cheering me on today. An independent, strong-willed, strong woman in a very powerful position who disagrees with her husband. I think that's the essence of what they call
or he disagrees with you. Let's move on to something else, and that's the midterm elections and the agenda for the next 2 years. President Trump talked about trying to find ways to work with Nancy Pelosi, the likely Speaker of the House, and with the new Democratic majority, unless they start investigating him. Here is the president.
Can you compartmentalize that and still continue to work with them for the benefit of the rest of the country?
No.
Or are all bets off?
No. If they do that, then it's just all it is a warlike posture.
But some presidents have been able to compartmentalize, Kellyanne, to do business at the same time that they're being investigated.
Well, Chris, you should play the other clip of the president in that stem winder of a press conference from Wednesday, where he said that there are a few areas he thinks that the Democrats are ready to work on. He mentioned trade. He mentioned immigration. I spoke with the president this morning. He called me from Paris, and he said infrastructure, immigration, obviously the economy. We don't want to go backwards on these economic gains. And President Trump on Wednesday answered 68 questions from 35 reporters. It's unheard of. President Obama answered 22 questions from 10 reporters in the press conference after his midterm self-described shellacking, where he lost 63 seats in the House. And this president, he just stands there and holds forth, taking question after question, and said that he will work on infrastructure, immigration. Lame duck will be focused on judicial nominations and immigration. But that's a question for the Democrats, too. Are they going to be investigating or legislating? Are they going to be trying to impeach him or talk about infrastructure?
They say they're going to do both. You brought up the press conference. This brings me to my final subject, which is the now infamous confrontation with Jim Acosta at that news conference. As you know, I have been very critical of Acosta's behavior myself, but I want to ask you about 2 responses by the White House. First, to tweet a video that was clearly altered to make it look like it was more of a physical confrontation than it really was, although I do think it was inappropriate. And second, to pull Acosta's pass to get into the White House and to threaten to do that to other reporters.
Well, Chris, first of all, what do you mean by edited or, as others are saying, quote, doctored video? He either put his hands on her and grabbed the mic back, or he did not, and he clearly did.
No, he clearly did, but the video was altered, and there are experts who have looked at it to make it look, speed it up to make it look, pardon?
Oh, well, that's not altered. That's sped up. They do it all the time in sports to see if there's actually a first down or a touchdown. So I have to disagree with the, I think, overwrought description of this video being doctored as if we put somebody else's arm in there. He should have apologized to that young aide, and as far as I know, he has not. I'm much more interested in the work of Alex Acosta than Jim Acosta. He's the Secretary of Labor doing a tremendous job for this country. But what the president said on Friday is instructive. You have to show respect to the White House, to the presidency, certainly to the president. And I think what Acosta did was very unfair to the rest of the press corps. There are many people who wanted to ask questions.
But
that occurred at the beginning of the press conference.
Because we really are over time already. If the president, you say show respect. If a reporter writes a story that the president doesn't like, if a reporter asks a question the president doesn't like, are you now saying that it's fair to pull their pass and prevent them from getting access to the White House? Because that strikes at the heart of freedom of the press.
Chris, if what you just described were the standard, we would have cleaned out the entire building 2 years ago. He gets a lot of unfair treatment by the press, but no, it's the disrespect at that moment in that incident. And I'm going to disagree with you. As a woman who's had people put her hands on me thinking they have a right to get into my personal space, I'm currently deciding whether or not to press charges on an incident that happened within the last month. In fact, I don't like him pulling that mic back and doing on her arm, it looked like a karate chop almost. She's a young aide, just doing her job. And if you play the full clip for your audience, you will see the president had already answered his questions, and he was moving on to the next questioner from NBC who was already standing ready to pose that question. And he wanted to move on to give other outlets an opportunity to ask their questions.
I agree with that. As a reporter who has sometimes been in that press room waiting, you always want to get your question. Kellyanne, thank you. Thanks for your time this weekend answering our